Years ago, a long-retired minister gave me advice I have not always followed. They told me when you go to a new church, when you take a new call, and it's been about a year and a half, a little more than that now for me here, they said every week, every single week without fail, what you should do is change something. They told me I would move things from one place to another. I would change the order of things. They said I would swap two pictures where they hung on the wall. The goal of which was not to gaslight the congregation about what was going on. The goal was to get used to change. I'm reminded of that because this week, tomorrow morning, in fact, we're going to repaint the walls of the Earth Room here. Nothing too radical. It's going to be pretty neutral and warm, and surely some of us will not like it. And that's okay. A little change every week. We're not going to repaint every week. As part of this, though, as part of the change, we're going to take the 7 principles and move them into the sky room, where they'll get better visibility through the week and also give us space to imagine new possibilities up here. And surely some of us won't like that either. And that's okay too. But as I was in the sky room earlier this week talking with some folks about where to put them up, where they could go, someone asked a question which I had both never heard before and is totally reasonable and obvious. Why, they asked, why do the principles have numbers? I mean, you have to keep track of them somehow, but there's not really like an order to, there's not a narrative. I mean, we can sort of construct one, but it's not inevitable that one has to follow the other. You don't need the inherent worth and dignity first in order for respect for the interdependent web of all existence to make sense. You could swap those, we'd be fine. For 2 centuries, we Unitarian Universalists have been wrestling with the problem of how to express things commonly believed among us. And I shared last week some different versions of that from 1887 and 1936, 1961 and 1995. It was actually much more interesting than I'm making it sound right now. On your way out, you can find copies of those different versions in the basket just outside. But the point of all of that is that we're not united by a fixed and changeless creed of exactly what to believe and how to believe it. But on the other hand, we do have a shared set of values and commitments that we keep on trying to find better ways to articulate. These principles don't need numbers because they're just trying to describe what these sort of nebulous shared values are. They're different facets of a gem, they're different parts of a whole. That commitment to change, to update them, to revise them, is core to our way of doing religion. That's true for us as a whole body, our 1,000 or so congregations trying to do this. And it's also true for us individually. You arrive in this house on your very first Sunday, maybe at the end of a long journey that brought you there, and also at the beginning of a long journey of discernment and growth and change. You change a little bit every week. That commitment to change, of trying to articulate our faith, is so core to our way of doing religion that 2.5 years ago, the board of our association, of our denomination, appointed a study commission to propose revisions to this, a wholesale revision. And this process is, in fact, built into our bylaws. We're a little bit overdue for this, actually. That commission, the team, and copies of their report also are outside. It included ministers and lay folks and religious educators and academics, elders and young adults, and they hosted theological panel discussions and focus groups and individual interviews and surveys that had almost 11,000 responses. They had 45 feedback sessions with 4,600 participants. all of which is only then to propose a set of revisions. Those proposed changes go to our annual General Assembly. All our congregations send delegates and propose amendments and have basically a 4-day-long business meeting. You didn't hear the shocked gasp from past board members or past parliamentarians. But the idea is, democracy is the best system, democracy is the worst system we have except for all the others, right? This is how we do change. If the majority approve at that General Assembly, then we spend the whole coming year that follows, 23-24, studying and in conversation and proposing changes. And then at General Assembly in 2024, it requires a 2/3 majority vote of all our congregations for adoption. If you find this process fascinating, I do, let's talk. And in fact, Fred would love to talk with you about what GA is like and how you can go there and be a part of this process. The point of all this being, change is deep in our tradition and it takes considered time. Let me tell you about what they're proposing because I'm curious for your take on this. And I'll say from the start, I am not here to pitch you on this revision. I'm not here to try and convince you of this or to try to talk you out of it either. I'm mostly just curious for what your take is. What seems like it makes sense? Where do you find resistance in it? So here we go. Here's the proposal, the frame for it, the opening. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, we promise each other, congregation to congregation, and throughout our association, to support and assist one another in our ministries, which does not just mean the job that I have, but this whole enterprise we're all engaged in. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We're accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, those shared values are, and in fact, I think there may be a slide for this, AV folks, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. So, no numbers in this version. They're like petals on a flower. They're parts of a whole. They're facets of that gem, each inseparable from the other. Each one an articulation of what does it mean when we say our core value is love? What does that mean? At our 9 a.m. service where we have religious education classes for the grade schoolers, we looked at compasses. And I showed them this compass pointing towards north. That's love, right? That is the direction. That's the heading that we follow. And then I thought about doing this with you all. But we brought them into the center of the room, and I put them all under a sheet so that they couldn't see where they were, and we spun them around and around and around, and then handed them the compass and said, all right, find your way north. The point being that our discipline of love can be that compass, can be that guide, but of course it gets a little bit more complicated. I put these values into the form of a giant box. Because this is apparently prop day at church. But I like this because what I want to do is the same thing that this is doing, saying these are all different ways of understanding a whole. This is not a sequence or an argument. These are different aspects, different entry points to a whole. So I'm going to read through the descriptions of what each of these are. And there should be a slide for each one of these. So Michael and team, we're putting you through the paces this morning. But this first principle is interdependence. Yo! I see what you did there. No, please, yeah, interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of existence. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. So you hear in this echoes of some of the current version of the principles. You hear in this maybe too an articulation of other parts of this, other ways of thinking of what that value means. Well, next is pluralism. I mean, of course, not next because this is an arbitrary order. Pluralism, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture and experience and theology. So it's not accidental that there are as many different theologies in this room right now as there are people in this room. That is intentional. We cultivate that. We covenant, we promise to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and our commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice means that we work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant, we promise to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. And again, you hear threads of the current work, but also a commitment to action in this that I think is implied by, but not necessarily explicit in the current form. Transformation. We adapt to a changing world. We covenant to collectively transform, all of us together, and grow spiritually and ethically. We're people in continuous process as a whole and as individuals. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages. Never complete, never perfect, which is sort of a relief. Okay. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith and presence and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Now, I can't help but say that our pledge drive kicks off in 2 weeks. But also, and I like and appreciate being part of a community where we just talk forthrightly about money. And, people do what they can, and we all put it together, and we do great. But that's not what this is talking about exactly. That's one little slice of it. I read this as so much bigger than that. A spirit of gratitude and hope. A spirit of abundance. A sharing of presence. When we were doing that stones ritual earlier, that is what we're doing. We're sharing our presence. We're sharing our lives with each other, not just individually bringing up our own piece in an essentially private experience, but all together seeing each other and being seen. At our 9 a.m. service, which is a lot smaller than this one, people place a stone, they come up to the center of the room, and then we all say together, "We are with you." And that's the practice. It's the same practice that we're doing here, even if silently. A generosity, an abundance of presence, of knowing and being known, of relationship, fundamentally. And equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities, which means inside this room, yes, but also in the world outside of here. None of these values are just about what goes on inside this house. All of them ask, what are we going to do in the world? Well, if you'll bring us back, the next slide is all of them together again. We draw, said the commission, we draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage. We build on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together. It's at the center of our shared values. It's what's inside this whole box. We're accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values for living the work of our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. I appreciate that framing too, because love is hard work. I know about you, but I do not feel our values flowing through me at every moment of every day, all the time. I appreciate the spiritual discipline of love too, because it says our values are not just things we should hold and do when we feel like doing them. They're things to do when you don't feel like doing them. That's work. That's practice. That's the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence and equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and justice. This is very different. And maybe the commission should have just changed a word or two every Sunday, changed the numbers periodically, right, to get us ready for that. And it's also not that different. It's one way of describing what we're discovering in our own search for meaning. It's not intended to be prescriptive. It's intended to do a better job of describing where we are already. And it's true for all of us collectively, I think, but also for each of us as individuals in process, rooted in experience of the transcendent, of awe and wonder and gratitude, informed by history, welcoming of critical reason, calling us to make justice in the world, and fed by always interdependent community. So I'm not here to try and pitch you on this and convince you that this is great, and I'm not going to argue against them either. What I've been doing these last few months since an earlier draft of this was released is sitting with them, trying to let this way of describing things settle in and see what sticks, what resistance fades away and what stays, where it feels like there's beauty and it says a thing that wasn't said well before, and what feels missing still. And I commend that practice to you, because that same practice for our shared principles, that also is the practice for each of us as individuals. That's discernment. It's the self-reflection that says, who am I and what am I about? What does every piece of myself, my experience and my history, the best of my thinking and the warmest of the compassion in my heart, what does that tell me about who I am and who I'm called into becoming, where I'm called into going? That's the work as individuals and all together.